We did go with our medical theme and jokingly called ourselves Dr. Bucci and Dr. Snyder. So this is our circulation CPR session, and our agenda today is we're going to start out with why circulation matters. And then we're going to look at our circulation health. We'll do a little checkup, talk about strategies for that. Then we're going to diagnose potential circulation barriers and create a circulation resuscitation plan. And then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end and an opportunity for you to reflect on your learning today and give us some feedback on our session. So I know there may be questions that arise, and we have created a parking lot document for you. So if you're someone who you think you may forget your question by the time we get to that at the end of our session, you can go ahead and pop it into this document, and everyone should have editing rights. And then we'll take questions after we present all of our material today.
So we're going to start out with a little bit of humor for you. Why did the cardiologist recommend that his patients go to the library? He heard they're good for circulation. There's your little bit of librarian humor for the day. So I just always like to throw a quote in any presentation that we do, and I really like this one, and a lot of you all know April Dawkins, but how can we teach responsibility without restricting access to library materials? You can go to the next slide, Camie. Okay, whenever we do professional development, we like to connect it directly to the media coordinator evaluation instrument. So where circulation is concerned, I pulled some elements from the evaluation instrument at the proficient level. So provides an open, equitable, and accessible learning environment, policies and procedures to support effective school library media programs, utilizes a variety of strategies, et cetera, et cetera. These are all at the proficient level. What standards do you think relate to circulation? Feel free to pop one that you might be thinking of in the chat.
And since I can't see the chat while I am sharing my screen, Molly's going to keep an eye on that for us. Any thoughts from our audience?
Yeah, so far Allison has said reading for pleasure, variety of materials, dynamic shelving has come up.
Yep. These are all things that relate. There's so many areas that relate to circulation. So thanks for calling attention to some of the other things in our evaluation instrument. So you are here today on possibly a snow day. What is your why? What about our presentation piqued your interest? In Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, we have in all of our departments something known as wildly important goals. We call them WIGs for short. Last year, we had a WIG to increase our print and our ebook circulation by 5%. We met this goal, and we circulated over 1.5 million print and 1.5 million ebooks. And we have added that as a goal for this year. We are continuing to work on circulation. We know that reading is the skill that is necessary for every subject every content area for students. But we also want you to resist the temptation to compare your circulation data with another school. Every school has different factors that influence the circulation. Things like a different enrollment, a different collection, staff, the type of schedule that your school has. And these are just a few of the factors that could influence your circulation. I think most of you will agree when I say that your admins don't understand what we do as librarians. But circulation provides a data point that you can use in a conversation with administrators who are very data driven. And circulation is one of the visible pieces of our work. Circulation data is not the same as like reading comprehension. It's not knowing if the kid's actually reading the book, but circulation is what we need to start with. They're just the beginning. And with strong circulation, we would hope to see strong reading happening at that school. So thank you for coming on a snow day. I hope you have a reason for being here, and I hope that we can talk about some of the whys with circulation today.
Well, and Anne, I know you can see the chat, but I just want to make sure Camie saw that there are some good responses to this. What is your why? A lot of it's about increasing circulation for specific age groups, and some are saying needing to get rid of outdated books to help boost that, to freshen up shelves, and to build some relationships. Different teachers and their relationship to the library can usually be one of those barriers or a success. So I wanted to make sure, Camie, that you knew some good things were happening in the chat.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
We love hearing from you.
I love this quote, and I think this might be one of the most powerful things that I share with you today. 71% of school librarians were checking out one book per week to kindergarten students. No matter what grade, it means if students visit the library once per week for checkout and are only allowed one book per visit, that adds up to 4 books per month, or about 36 books per year. Is that enough to encourage literacy and a love of reading? So, is it a fear that students will lose materials? Sure, that's a valid fear. And this could be a self-imposed barrier to circulation. Students will lose and damage books. That's the price of doing the business that we do. But the reason for this business is to encourage literacy, and that should be the driving factor behind circulation. So, for example, your checkout policy, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the presentation, your policy might be that you limit students to a certain number of books because you know that they can't afford to replace those books. But hopefully you and your school, your media advisory committee, staff at your school, administrators can come to a consensus on the purpose of checkout using information from AASL as guidelines. So the Information Access Statement from 2017 states, the school library is the one place in the school where a student may satisfy his or her informational, cultural, social, and personal needs, regardless of chronological age, ethnic background, grade level, or achievement level.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about your circulation health. So this is where you're going to think about your checkup. As we were working with our staff this past year with our wildly important goals that Ann mentioned, we wanted to make sure that all of our staff knew how to find out what their circulation was, their circulation data. So we use Follett Destiny. Many of you may use that. If you use something different, you're going to follow the procedures for your automation system. So we looked at how to run your circ data for the library, and we have included a link in the presentation on how to do that in Follett Destiny, and that is the library statistics snapshot report. This year, we've gone one step further beyond just boosting overall circulation. We looked at the average circulation for the schools last year. For the schools that met that goal and they increased by 5%, they're going to work to increase their overall circulation again this year, but they're going to dive into individual student data and look at the students to see who in their building is not accessing the materials of the library. So we've got steps on running your individual patron circulation, and you can do that by homeroom or grade level. And we asked our staff to target the bottom 5% of their students so they could have conversations and pull them aside privately and just check in with them to find out why it is they weren't checking out books. And we also look at our ebook data. We have Sora as our district ebook platform. And so we run those circulation statistics through Overdrive Marketplace. And we've got steps linked here on how to do that if you happen to use Overdrive and have never done that before. So along with collecting your data, you want to think about what makes an effective policy. And so we're going to take a look at how our policies may be impacting our circulation. And Ann's going to talk about that.
So for your circulation policies, who sets them? Is that you? Is that you in collaboration with members of your staff, your media advisory committee, your admin? What about students? Are the policies in place to help you, the librarian, or to help kids access reading material? We hear a lot from our media coordinators that their media center gets closed for various reasons. Testing probably is the number one reason for losing access to the space. Book fair. Can you compromise? The weeks and the days that your space is closed, can you go mobile with circulation? Can you take a cart out in the hallway with books or to a classroom so that that actual physical circulation does not stop, even though the physical space is inaccessible to students? Can we change our mindsets about lost books? Yeah, kids are going to lose them. But I hope that if I lose a book from my library, that kid is reading that book over and over and over again, and perhaps even sharing it with someone else. And then another thing to consider is, are you offering a graduated system? So we might only let kindergarten and first grade check out one book. Can we consider after a quarter or perhaps the midpoint of the year increasing that to 2 books? Or looking at different grade levels, increasing that number of books. Communicate your policies. I think it's really important. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Does your registrar know to ask students when they are withdrawing from school? They're going to ask for their technology back. Are they asking for library books back? So that's a stopgap measure that you can put in place and hopefully recover some of your materials. But that's a free, simple thing that you can do.
So in our district, we use the effective library policies and framework for diverse youth from UNC, and this is the slide for effective policies. So take a moment to read through the information on the slide and reflect on your current circulation policy for your library. As you're reading through that, think about whether your current policy aligns with this framework and is there room for improvement. And if you would like to, you can pop your ideas in the chat. One of the things we're really trying to work on is the collaborative part and involving members of your media advisory committee, if you have one, staff, students, if they are older students, sometimes they are on your media advisory committee, getting a collective buy-in so that it's not just you setting the policy for the entire school. Any thoughts coming through the chat?
So I was looking at some of the posts in the chat, Camie, and these are some of the concerns that we hear when we go out and visit schools in Charlotte, and the pushback from teachers because they don't want to be responsible for trying to keep track of the kids' books. I think it starts with a conversation with admin. If it can be a top-down approach so the admin understands the purpose of the circulation. And then to address another question I saw in the chat, the purpose of the Library Media Center collection is for student self-selection. And the purpose of a classroom library is different. And I think it's also important to help your teachers understand the differences between the two libraries and that they can work in conjunction with one another.
Thank you for sharing that, Ann, and that's going to lead me into the next part of this. So part of the issue is the communication of the policies. So I'll talk from the elementary lens because I have not worked in a secondary library, but have spent most of my career in an elementary library. And I really try to start with the newcomers, the youngest children in the building. And in my particular school, we did have pre-K, and the primary team of teachers that taught pre-K and kindergarten, I asked to be on the agenda when they had their newcomers night in the spring for the upcoming school year. So that was usually in May. And I talked to the families about how the school library worked. Now, I didn't get 100%, of parents coming, but I did get a good number. And then I tried to circle back in the fall, especially with the newest students, and making sure that the parents knew the regularity, how often their kids were going to be coming to the library, when books will be coming home, things like that. So thinking about, is your policy in writing? Where do families find that? Do you have a website? Do you use social media? Are you sending things home in paper format? Do you have folders that go home on a weekly basis where you can communicate some of these things with your families? Newsletters, having teachers help you with communication. Some buildings, the teachers are really willing to do that. Others, not as much. They want you to take on that primary responsibility. As the students get older, upper elementary and even into secondary, they should be able to articulate to their families what those policies are. Now let's talk about scheduling and how scheduling may affect circulation. So I'm going to talk about the elementary, and we'll talk a little bit about secondary considerations. One of the things, I talk to our elementary staff when I'm doing school visits is how their schedule. Some schools, they have an hour. Some schools, they have 45 minutes. Some schools have 30 minutes. Some schools are so large that they only see their kids every other week. Some schools, they have time in the morning during arrival for open checkout, maybe during the middle of the day, all these different ways that kids can access the media center. So those are things that you need to think about. If there are ways for you to advocate with administration. Maybe instead of having you in the car rider line in the morning, you could advocate to have your duty in the media center. I know that's not possible 100% of the time, but those are the things that you could share with administration in looking at your circulation data and your schedule and how often students can get to the media center. Also, our newer media coordinators at the elementary level sometimes have trouble with time management, and they get going in the lesson and they've used too much time out of their allotted time for that special, and circulation doesn't happen. So we've got a document that we created back in the fall to help them think through when should they do book exchange. Maybe they want to do it at the beginning when the students just get to the media center instead of the end of the lesson. And there's some ways that they can think through the pros and the cons of that and try out different ways of setting aside time for book exchange during your fixed library time. And go ahead and talk about your secondary considerations.
So there are some of the same considerations for secondary, but secondary also proposes some other unique situations. One that we have in CMS is my ELA, English Language Arts teachers will not collaborate with me because they have such a set curriculum and pacing is so tight. Think outside ELA, think about social studies, think about career and technical education. We have some schools that are even having visits to the media center through PE and health classes. So think outside of the normal like research-based classes that you could approach for visits for maybe scheduled checkout. Another thing we determined was, have students been through the process of checking out a book? Because I saw in the chat, students forget from elementary to middle and middle to high how a library works and how it functions. So we kind of have to remind them, invite them into the space and actually have them go through that entire process of looking up the book, finding it on the shelf, and then bringing it to the circulation desk or to the adult in the space, wherever you are, and checking out that book and knowing where to return the book. Setting that expectation that when you visit this space, we want you to check out a book. It's the price of admission into the space. And then also looking at your collection from the eyes of a student. We're librarians. We know the Dewey Decimal System. We know it involves order. We know the difference between the call numbers of fiction and nonfiction books, but our kids might not. So have some students actually give them a topic, have them look it up, and see what their frustrations are when they attempt to locate books, and maybe where the improvements can be made perhaps in signage or in display so that students know where their favorite books might be located in the space.
And Anne, I'm really glad you mentioned that. It makes me think we need to add another section to our presentation to talk about, and we can talk about this more when we get to Q&A, how is the arrangement of your collection in your space affecting circulation? And we've done a lot of work on that within our district in helping our staff think through these things and how books are displayed and changing things out on a regular basis to make things pop, and the programming and all the things that we do as we wear so many hats in our jobs. So now we're going to get into talking about some barriers, and we've already touched on a little bit of those. So thinking about all the different factors that influence circulation. So you need to name your barriers. So we've asked our staff to think about that. What are your barriers? Most people know what they are. There may be some things that you're not aware of, but just naming the barriers that's the first step in overcoming them. Thinking about, we're not just going to stop there. We're going to try to come up with some strategies to bust the barriers. And that's one of the things we love doing when we do our coaching visits and helping people come up with workarounds. Yes, this is an issue, but could you try this? And Anne's going to talk about that a little bit more.
So we, like Camie said, we like for our media staff to recognize their barriers. Telling us, putting it down on paper is part of recognizing what that barrier is. And I think that's really important for you all to do, is to name your barriers. Are there solutions that you could implement at your school? Sure. We have 2 documents that we linked here on this particular slide. There's one called Circ Barriers and Buster's Note Catcher, and that's for you to add your own ideas. But take a look at that, Circulation Barriers and High Leverage Solutions. We tried to anticipate every issue that we've seen through our visits at schools in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and proposing some barrier busters for those. Take a moment to look over that document. What is something that is working well in your school, and what is an idea that you would like to try that you think you have the capacity to go back to your administration, to go back to maybe some teachers at your school and implement in the very near future? So feel free to pop those into the chat.
Camie, do you want me to read them out loud?
Yes, that would be
Okay.
wonderful.
You got it. It says things like middle schoolers say, I don't like to read. In my district, when a child gets to 4th or 5th grade, they no longer want to check out books. A lot of people agreeing that testing is killing reading. And, again, a lot of 4th and 5th grade, it's like it used to be middle school, but now it's that 4th, 5th grade age group that are so focused on testing. So it says a lot of them are experiencing reading as a test score. And EL curriculum doesn't promote reading for fun. A lot of it's about answering questions. The restriction to a library budget, not having one, or having a very small amount, even $2 per student really doesn't get you very far. And then when we don't really have anything of interest in the library, if a student goes in and doesn't see things that are exciting or familiar, sometimes book fairs will bring in that money, but again, the consistency of that is challenging. And somebody said, all I do is hear, do I have to check out a book? I can hear the students say, do I have to check out a book? I can hear it. Block scheduling leaves little time for exploring the media center. And I know I hear that a lot too, as teachers say, I just don't have time to bring the kids. You know, I have too much to do in the classroom to bring the kids. So sometimes that's the library schedule, but a lot of times it's the teaching schedule that can be so restrictive.
So yeah, these are all very valid barriers to circulation. I wonder, for those who are trying to help students to be more motivated with reading, I wonder if a reading challenge might help to motivate students, coming up with something like March Madness, since March is right around the corner, some type of reading challenge, competition for fun, obviously.
So this is a very complex and multifaceted issue. And I heard the things about budget, your collection, having things that students want to read, having the time to get to the library, the motivation, what's going on with testing and instruction. And we know that these are things that we face. And we just want to encourage you to start somewhere and try one strategy. So hopefully today we're going to talk about some more ideas. You can come away with one thing you can try. So what we did, go
I
ahead.
have to point out, Camie, there was a couple busters, so I gave you the negatives. I'm sorry,
Okay.
but here was two really good ones that came in too, and I'm sorry if I missed anybody else's, but I had to say, the mystery date with a mystery date with a book for Valentine's Day in middle school was mentioned, and it was a hit not just with girls but boys too. And I actually saw that in the library recently as well, that just putting like the first line of the book caught their attention, and like the commitment that they made to, okay, I have to read it. Like they knew they had to read it if they opened it. They couldn't just open it and put it back. So that's a fantastic idea. And then somebody else said that they're celebrating Black History Month with a challenge. So 2nd through 5th graders read 10 books, and then they get a large sticker as their incentive of reading those 10 books. So there's some really good challenges that were put out there too. Like good, positive reading challenges, not like barrier challenges.
Yes. So what we did with our staff is we asked them last year to come up with 3 action steps, 3 things that they were going to do, and give themselves a timeline to complete that. So for some of them, the first step was just finding out what their circulation was. And so we had them look at their circulation from the previous year and then the current year and compare those. Some people, it had to do with doing a reading challenge. So they came up with their circulation goal and their timeline. On the next slide, we have a link. If you would like to make a copy of that, it's a forced copy, and you can take that back and do your own CPR plan. Now, let's take some time for Q&A. What questions do you have for us? And I'm going to stop sharing at the moment. And I'm also going to look at the document, the parking lot, to see if there are any questions on there.
While you're pulling that up, Camie, I just put this in the chat as well, but for people who watch the recording, so they know there's been a lot of really good recommendations for reading challenges that were added to the chat and some resources that were even shared. So I will crowdsource those into your document so people have like a one-stop shop to know where to go find those again. So I know we get worried sometimes when we close a chat, I just lost something. So I'm going to make sure that those get moved over while you're doing the Q&A.
All right. So, and one person asked about getting a link to the AASL quote from our slide 9. So we'll research that and pop it into the document for you. And One person asked how to see circulation statistics for each section of the library. And I know that there is a way to do that in Destiny. I can't tell you the steps right off the top of my head. I'd have to go back in there, but I believe you can run the circ for each section, and you might be able to get that answer.
I know you can use copy categories with genres to kind of double down into like what genres are circulating more. So it might have something to do with copy categories.
But yeah, I believe you can run that report. So that's something I can follow up on. Someone asked a question about class sets becoming obsolete. If you're still on our meeting, would you mind unmuting and tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, that was my question. So basically, when I came into the library last year, we had a lot of class sets. So like those set of like 20 or 30 books for the entire class to read it. So now that we serve a population of students that are at different levels, a lot of times the teacher may use multiple books to service each reading level of students. So I guess I'm asking for my curiosity, is that becoming obsolete or is it just shifting and changing?
So I can speak from our district. We don't really have class sets in our library collections. That's more from the instructional side. And every building kind of handles that a little bit differently. They would have a book room with like the guided reading type books. We've moved away from that because we use a particular curriculum now that supplies those books. We tend to only have, single copies that are circulating in our media centers. Anne, do you want to add anything to that?
No, other than, yeah, we moved away from having those because we found that having class sets in Destiny kind of skewed our circulation data. So we moved away from having those. And also for it to be the responsibility of the school library media coordinator, because we felt that was more like a curriculum role, subject content area role, as opposed to the school library media coordinator.
Right, just a little different purpose for the books. And then there's a question about educating classroom teachers on why students should be allowed to check out with fewer limits. I have a kindergarten teacher who refuses to let her students take books home at all. And I can speak to that first. And then Anne, if you have anything to add. This is something that I hear frequently, and it is very concerning to me for a lot of reasons, and I'm sure to you all as well. If you can have a conversation with the kindergarten teacher or team, that would be really helpful. I've tried to coach some of our staff on doing kind of a graduated or gradual release. So maybe the first month they're looking at books in the library. They get to practice checking a book out. I had a librarian recently tell me she lets them go through the steps, but then they turn their book in. They check it in before they leave. So that's the beginning part. And then I've said, well, can you talk with the teachers about doing an in-house checkout and keeping the books in the classroom in a designated spot where they, as a class, look at the books, share the books together between library visits, and then the books come back. And then after another 6 or 8 weeks, I would really pump it up, communicate to the families, and let them know the books are going home. They're going to spend the night at your house, and have a kind of a big build up to that. Maybe that would help. And if you do have a media advisory committee, bringing these types of issues and concerns up to your team so administration is aware and that you can all work together to solve those problems.
I think sometimes I really like that, Camie, about using your MTAC team, because I think a lot of times we feel like we are the only ones that are trying to make a difference, or we're the only ones saying something about it. So when you can get a small team on board that, you know, understands, that's a really helpful way to get admin to listen or to get other teachers to listen. You know, if you get a second grade teacher who says, actually, it's worked really well for us to send more books home, and here's how we've done it, and here's how I manage it, then those second grade teachers might hear from their peer rather than hearing from the librarian. It just kind of tends to work things over.
I'm seeing a lot of things about reading challenges, and a lot of our librarians are doing that as well. We have one elementary librarian who started a trend. She shared at one of our district PDs last year that she allowed students to take home a bag of books before winter break, and then she's done it again for spring break. And she sent a letter to the families telling them that she was going to make this available. They just needed to send in a bag, and the parents signed a permission slip that their child had permission to take home, I think it's up to 20 books over break. And so it has been very successful at her school. Her PTA even bought canvas bags for all the children to put their library books in. So she's getting ready to do that again for spring break. She says that her shelves look pretty bare because she's had so many students participating, and some of our other staff have taken this on. One of our librarians kind of does a book subscription, and she has kids fill out a little interest survey, and then she compiles books based on the topics that they request. She puts an activity sheet and some other little items like a bookmark and maybe stickers that she has managed to collect with book fair incentives and things like that, and she sends those home with students. Now that's not something that she does day in and day out, but she does do it at special times. Is there anyone else that has a question that they would like to ask out loud?
We just got one in the chat, so I think people should definitely respond to, well, two actually, but if you have resources, please respond. But either Camie or Ann, if you want to address, there's a question about how to set up March Madness reading challenges, just how to get started and where are some resources. And then another one is just getting those books returned. Students just shrug and sometimes say, well, I lost it, and kind of don't really care. And so I think addressing either of those, so feel free, I know a lot of you are responding and having that communication in the chat, but I wanted to elevate those two to both of you.
Okay, so that's really the question about how to get the books returned is very timely. We had a lot of chatter about that particular topic in our Google group today. So some of the suggestions that were posted today were to send the overdue notices home more frequently, to do a shout out in the morning news for classes with the fewest number of books, a whole class reward, if they have no overdue or lost books. This person did a Mario Kart wall last year with all the classes with different Mario Kart characters, and they were racing to the finish line for who had the least lost or late books. So it was a very visual reminder to return books. Picking up books from the classroom, so having library helpers do that in the mornings, visiting the home rooms, we use Parent Square, so sending a Parent Square message home to the parents or families, sending the electronic notices to staff every Monday. Those were some of the suggestions for how to handle the lost books that some of our media staff talked about today.
And I had a librarian I spoke with today. She keeps a roll of tickets, and when kids return their books, they get to put their name on a ticket. It goes in a hat, and she draws for prizes when they return their books, and that's on a regular basis. So it's not just at the end of the year. Lots of different incentives that you can do. And another school, they do a quarterly assembly and recognizing students for reading achievement. Could be responsibility in returning books.
So Jane has her hand up, and then we had another question I wanted to ask both of you. Jane, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm so not used to using Teams. I found that a couple things have really worked for me. We use talking points. I'm sure that at this point, most schools use some kind of communication system to talk with their families about to make various announcements. And those all come with a camera feature. And so I have ask kids when they come in and I see that they have lots of overdues, like, hey, can I text a picture of these to your family and ask them to help you find them? I do also, Destiny does let you send automated emails. I think that in an age of privacy I think that's not appropriate for middle and high school, except that you can set it up to send to their personal email or their school email rather. You can have Destiny automatically, like once a week or once a month, send a reminder with photos to your kid's school email, like, hey, these are the books you have out, please bring them back. But I think that sending home the photo to families has made the greatest difference. And I think that it's really important to me that we not reward classes, it's impossible to ask a class to bring all their books back. There's always going to be that one kid who's in that foster situation, that unstable home situation, that homeless situation. We can't blame that child, especially because I'm in elementary. We can't blame that child for the situation that they're in, and we can't reward the classes that are lucky enough to not have that kid. You know what I mean? So it bothers me a bit when I see like, oh, I give prizes or whatever. And I really, really want kindergartners to take books home. My kindergartners take 3 books home from the very first day of school. We don't stagger into it. We just take them home. And only a couple of kids have not brought them back. And if we really get to a point that I'm talking to the parent and they still can't find anything, then we start to say, well, this kid will keep them at school. But we are the only connection that a lot of parents have to books to read to their kids. And if your kindergartners aren't taking books home, then their parents are probably not reading to them. So I really hope that people who aren't sending them home with their kindergartners will really rethink that and start sending them home. You can convince these teachers, if they know that they're not going to be held accountable, that it's not their fault if the books get lost, then they'll be more likely to let you, they'll be more likely to send them home if they know that they won't be punished in the end.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Jane. And I think it's, there's ways to modify it. So if there is some success in your school with doing some of those challenges at the end of the year, it could be 80% of the class or a certain, it doesn't have to be 100% return. And I've seen some people that do that to kind of accommodate exactly like you said. So a kid doesn't get singled out or a certain family. I mean, a lot of times that's kind of what it comes down to. It might be a family in a situation where the kid in every grade level. So I think that's an important thing to point out, and I appreciate you doing that. So, I think we that's why these things are important, why we have these conversations, to really kind of think through something that works for somebody might work differently in a different community. So I appreciate just all of the suggestions and things that are coming through the chat and sometimes pushing us to think differently. I used to send home notices that said, this is how much the book is if you've lost it. And I changed all of my, I went into the actual settings and I changed it to, we always want the book back. And I actually took the amount off instead of putting the amount on there, and somehow kind of like you're saying, where it's just seeing the picture is kind of what helped change things. And it went back to that more positive thing. We want our book back, not we're going to punish you for, not being able to return this book. So it's things like that. And I learned it from another librarian. It was just seeing how somebody else did it that went, oh, that's a really good idea. I should change the way that just the language of how we ask for things back.
And those are really great points. Thank you so much, Jane. And we do talk with our staff about we have many Title I schools that have a social worker or family advocate to let you know which kids are the kids that may be in those special situations where you can waive and remove the books from the student's account, so those don't, cause those types of concerns.
Yeah, and I said I'm not going to name names because we're doing this in a recording, but somebody said unfortunately there's just some schools that don't have the ability to replace a lost book, and I think that's a conversation. I'm same situation where it just meant we didn't get the money. I would make a list and I would keep that number and bring it to my administration and say, if there's instructional funds that are left over at the end of the year, this is how many books that I chose not to pursue the money, and when I framed it that way, might not be very much, but a couple of $100 to say, these are the Diary of a Wimpy Kid books that didn't come back. This was the Dog Man book that didn't come back, and say, and here's the circulation, here's the balance and why I need to replace these books. Sometimes having, I know both Anne and Camie have mentioned this earlier, but bringing that data to administrators who speak that language, that's a really good way to use it. But it's tricky, it's tricky for every community, and some people get library funds and some people don't. And so it's hard to let go sometimes of the idea of sending home a bill for a lost book. And again, that's a good conversation to have with administration, have with your PLC, have with your MTAC, and use the people in your community that kind of help guide some of those conversations. Okay, so we are running out of time. Is there any questions, Camie or Anne, that you want to address before I elevate anything else from the chat?
I don't think we answered the one about the March Madness.
Yeah, go for it.
So I just did a little Google, and there's a lot out there. I'm not sure who asked that, but some of our librarians do different things. Some use the North Carolina Children's Book Awards, and they kind of battle those down and they read them through their weekly lessons, and then the kids vote. Some pick completely different books that may be student generated to go on the bracket. I know there's some counties that do books and brackets, that whole program in March, and it just generates enthusiasm. Of course, any of this can go in the wrong direction where people are focused on too much on the awards. You really want the kids just to love reading for the sake of reading. But anyway, there are things to try. And if they don't work, try something else next time.
Awesome. One of the questions that came in is if you have that flyer for the book bag that was mentioned, if that is something that could be shared, maybe put it in the Q&A. Don't have to find it right this second. I know we're in the middle of all this good stuff, but that would be a great thing to share. Somebody was looking for that.
The bag of books. Okay.
Yep. The bag of books. And then, similarly, somebody asked if there is, and I don't know that it got answered in the chat, but anything about sending books home over the summer, if anybody has played with that idea, because again, not everybody has access to a public library. And so sometimes providing those books through, and I see that being kind of parallel to that winter book bag or spring book bag. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So some of our schools have worked with a nonprofit, Promising Pages, and you may know of some others where they do kind of a bag of books that they send home with kids. Even doing, book drives, if your community is one that you feel like you could get books and then have the kids come through, maybe even during your library lessons, and select books to put in a bag to take home for the summer. I worked at a school once where I came up to the school once a week had the library open for several hours and publicized it, and the families could come. That, I think it was on Wednesday. It's been a long time since I did that. And check out books for about 6 weeks in the summer. Of course, you have to get administrator approval to do that, but that might be a possibility in some of your locations. Somebody mentioned having a free book fair where kids get to pick books, the last book fair of the year.
Yep, I've seen that, or even like a book swap. So kind of encouraging, that mentality of just bring in anything, and we'll do like a book swap instead of it feel like a, free book fair. Both are fantastic. And, some people are just basically saying, send it home. And if it comes back, it comes back. So again, knowing that some people, different communities, different mentalities, and that's wonderful, just to kind of hear some of the different opportunities that people have. All right, I think I might have caught up. I'm going to copy some more of these things over from the chat. I couldn't keep up. There's some really good stuff that's happening in the chat. So I will make sure, that we grab some of these ideas. I'll keep adding it over to the document after the fact. I have access to the chat afterwards. It does preserve for me, but I know that some of you, without being in a Microsoft account, will probably lose it. So just know that I will be moving some of those things over. Is there any other thoughts, questions before we close out? I think that's appropriate wait time, right? Well, thank you so much, both Camie and Ann, for taking what you did at NC Slamma and bringing this to a very accessible audience. We didn't even know it'd be a snow day when we decided on this date a while back. And it worked out beautifully to get your content out to over 80 people. So thank you to all of you that chimed in at 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon to learn some things and contribute. Lots of contributions were made, ideas shared, and questions answered. So I think that's always a big success. I will share this recording on our YouTube channel, so it will get added over there, and then obviously all the resources as well.
And if you all would, we have a reflection. We wanted to make sure if you could take a moment to complete a very short Google form to give us some feedback on your learning today.
And I'll send that also when I get the video up. This will also be on the YouTube. So please, this is Camie and Ann's feedback form. And so again, I know that it is important to them to know what was helpful. And they took what they do with their staff in Charlotte, and they keep doing this kind of work. So not only does it inform what they're doing with their team, but also, obviously for things like this as well. And when they present at places like NC Slamma. So if you came in a little late, don't worry, it was recorded. Like I mentioned, and I'll get that posted. It takes a few days to get it up on YouTube, but we'll get it there, and make sure that some of these links are easily accessible for you there too. Thank you, Camie, for mentioning that.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
And we have a resource slide too, and I think that may have the link for the AASL quote.
I was able to get it in the parking lot document.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ann.